Hey, what's up? My name is Sarah, and welcome to Gaia Monkey. Today, I'm going to be raining down some hard truths about recycling and how our idea of trash is total trash. But first, I'm going to need some tea. Sit tight, don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Let me start out by saying the recycling industry is broken, if you didn't know. It's completely broken, defective, muddled, illogical. You get the idea. It's certainly not what we were led to believe it to be. I can't help but feel like we were lied to as kids. The first catchy environmental PSA that I remember as a kid was Recycle Rex and his Close the Loop rap. It was bright, colorful, upbeat. It was totally hip to the times. It was the kind of jingle that gets stuck in your head. Even as old as I am now, I can still remember the tune. It's genius marketing. Let's take a short trip, shall we? Back to 1993. Ugh, what a great time to be a kid.
Tag team back again.
It wasn't right just to toss trash out of sight, but now I'm gonna keep it clean. I'm gonna start recycling. A little here, a little there will help the rivers and the air. Do it now, start today. Close the loop, it's the only way. It's such an easy thing to do, and it begins with me and you. We can make a difference. We can make old new. Close the loop. We can close the loop. Recycle, reduce, reuse. Close the loop. We can close the loop. Plastic bottles, aluminum foil, glass containers, and motor oil. Papers, cans, that old magazine, we got one. Land, let's keep it clean. So bug your neighbor, tell a friend. Cycles never really end. Don't just toss it, keep it new. We can do it, so can you. Don't wait, it's something we must do. Right now, the earth depends on you. You can make a difference. You can make old new. Recycle, reduce, reuse, and close the loop. You can close the loop. Recycle, reduce, reuse, and close the loop. We can close the loop. Recycle, reduce, reuse, and close the loop. Come on, team! You can do it!
This PSA got me excited about making a difference in this world. I started paying more attention to the litter on the side of the road or in the playground where I played. I made it a point to really engage in the lessons at school that had to do with environmental issues. I was ready to become that little hippie child that lived down inside of me. But later in life, I started learning the truth. I started figuring out some of the issues with recycling that didn't seem to make any logical sense. Recycle Rex really let me down. You told us that we could close the loop, and it was a lie.
That was a lie.
Okay, so we can't blame Recycle Rex. I mean, it isn't his fault. He just picked up an acting gig to make a few bucks. He was young, okay? And he really, really wanted those new Reebok Shack Attack shoes, all right? We all did. Truth be told, it was Disney that lied to us. Recycle Rex was created by Disney Educational Productions in a partnership with the California Department of Conservation. The entire focus was to spread the word about recycling, reducing, and reusing. It's great in theory. The problem is the recycling industry itself was feeding us bogus lies about their own ability to effectively recycle these materials. The idea of recycling, even back then, had been around for a long time. Glass, paper, and metal products were being recycled for decades, even centuries in some cases. It wasn't until the creation of single-use plastic packaging and containers that it seemed to become a serious issue. The message of we're going to bury ourselves in our own trash and filth was really introduced when manufacturers began widely distributing non-biodegradable material for containing consumable products. Consumers simply continued their normal behaviors and practices. They threw their trash away like they had always done. Of course, there's always been folks who litter. Littering is stupid, and nobody should do it, ever. But could it be said that litter is more of an aesthetic issue as opposed to an environmental one? If trash is laying on the ground in a playground as opposed to a landfill, does it cause more of an environmental impact? In some cases, yes. A single plastic candy wrapper could find its way to a water source where it might be ingested by a turtle, causing that turtle to have serious health complications or even death. Whereas if that candy wrapper were properly thrown away, where it eventually made its journey to a landfill and never found its way to a water source, Mr. Turtle would still be going on about his happy little turtley life, now wouldn't he? Let's say that candy wrapper were paper instead of plastic, and it found its way to a water source, and Mr. Turtle snacked on it because that's what Mr. Turtle does. Would the paper send Mr. Turtle to an early grave? Chances are slim, really. So in this theoretical circumstance, it's the material and not the location where the trash was left that caused our dear Mr. Turtle to perish. Now, whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that Mrs. Turtle is now a single mom having to swing on a pole for horny toads just to make ends meet? The little girl who threw her candy wrapper on the ground? Or maybe the manufacturer for refusing to package their delicious little candy morsels in paper instead of plastic? Let's take a trip a little further back in time, shall we? And look at a couple of the more memorable environmental PSAs that really began to shape our ideology in regards to waste. Introducing the infamous Iron Eyes Cody. Come with me to the year 1971.
Come with me and you'll be.
Lies are useless, Time Lord.
For the 1000th time, I tell you I am not a Time Lord!
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1771, Radio City Station, New York.
Let's take a look at a few things wrong with this ad, shall we? First of all, Iron Eyes Cody was played by Espera de Corte. This guy, an Italian-American actor. His parents were Sicilian immigrants. He was famous for portraying multiple Native American characters throughout his career. He was the mid-1900s version of the guy that plays the Native American in every movie. That guy. From 1925 until 1990, 65 years, he portrayed various Native American characters in films and even pretended to be Native American outside of movie roles.
This is disgust.
This man went so far as to legally change his name to Iron Eyes Cody. He pretended to be Native American for the majority of his life because it kept him working and it kept him making money. That's certainly not insulting to the Native American communities, now is it?
Do I detect a note of sarcasm?
Are you kidding me? This baby is off the charts. Why?
Now, this ad was created by the Keep America Beautiful organization, which was founded in 1953 by the American Can Company and the Owens, Illinois Glass Company. Later on, other corporations like Coca-Cola and the Dixie Cup Company joined them. On the first Earth Day in 1970, activists and other environmental entities were pushing the issue of throwaway containers and littering issues. Drive-thrus and takeouts were becoming an increasingly popular concept as more and more American women began hitting the workforce. And home-cooked meals were just the last thing a busy mama wanted to think about after a long day of coming home from being a boss. The protests surrounding the first Earth Day were focused on the disposable packaging produced by the food and beverage industries. Activists were holding the manufacturers accountable for the single-use packaging being made from non-biodegradable materials. The corporations that were a part of Keep America Beautiful were these same corporations producing this waste. And thus, Iron Eyes Cody swoops in to save the day, or save the earth, or whatever.
Whatever.
This was no more than a PR stunt. It shined a light on an important environmental issue while also shifting the blame to the consumers. Suddenly, the trash was no longer the fault of the manufacturers. Oh no. No. It was your fault. The consumer.
Well, that might be your problem. It's the consumer.
In an article published by the Chicago Tribune back in 2017, Dennis Dunaway summed this up brilliantly. He wrote, "Keep America Beautiful practiced a sly form of propaganda. Since the corporations behind the campaign never publicized their involvement, audiences assumed that the group was a disinterested party. The Crying Indian provided that guilt-inducing tear the group needed to propagandize without seeming propagandistic, and countered the claims of a political movement without seeming political. By making individual viewers feel guilty and responsible for the polluted environment, the ad deflected the question of responsibility away from corporations and placed it entirely in the realm of individual action, concealing the role of industry in polluting the landscape." He goes on to report, when the ad debuted, Keep America Beautiful enjoyed the support of mainstream environmental groups, including the National Audubon Society and the Sierra Club. But these organizations soon resigned from its advisory council over an important environmental debate of the 1970s, the bottle bills. Now, the bottle bills was legislation that would require soft drink and beer producers to sell their beverages in reusable containers, which they had been doing already up until around that point. The shift to the throwaway was responsible in part for the rising levels of litter that Keep America Beautiful publicized, but also, as environmentalists emphasized, for the mining of vast quantities of natural resources, the production of various kinds of pollution, and the generation of tremendous amounts of solid waste. The Keep America Beautiful leadership lined up against the bottle bills, going so far in one case as to label the supporters of the legislation as communists. Communists. Now, if you were alive in the 70s, you probably remember this. And if you're younger, you may not even realize, but being labeled as a communist back then was the same as being labeled as a terrorist today. Being labeled as a communist could ruin your career. It could possibly ruin your life, especially if the accusation was coming from big corporations and organizations such as this. It's insane. So Keep America Beautiful potentially ruined people's careers and lives because they supported something that was good for the environment. Let that sink in.
Wait a minute!
In an effort to keep most of the political rumble under wraps, several years later, Keep America Beautiful came out with another PSA starring Iron Eyes Cody. This one made it seem like all of your guilt is paying off, and you should keep blaming yourself for our trash if we're ever going to get it all cleaned up. But good job so far.
The first American people loved the land. They held it in simple reverence. And in some Americans today, that spirit is reborn. This is South Coast Botanic Garden in California. Once this was a dumping ground for trash and litter. Community volunteers cleaned, planted, and reclaimed it. And there the land is good again. But all around us are reminders of how far we still have to go. So everyone must get involved now. To contact the Keep America Beautiful team nearest you, write Keep America Beautiful, 99 Park Avenue, New York, New York. People start pollution. People can stop it.
Okay, hopping back into our time machine now. Destination 1987.
I am not offended.
No one we know is particularly fond of taking out the garbage. How about the prospect of not being able to get rid of it at all?
Something of a national joke.
A symbol of this country's growing problems with trash.
The nation's crisis in disposing of solid waste.
Filled with garbage is causing quite an international stink.
The Mobro Barge trash incident was the catalyst for the way we now perceive trash and recycling. The barge was loaded with over 3,000 tons of garbage from New York, and it wandered around the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico for months, looking for a place to deposit this load of rubbish. It toted it around for over 6,000 miles. This sparked a media frenzy, and the country was told that the reason the Mobro was continuing to float around with tons and tons of garbage is because there was no landfill space for it to go.
Landfill space is also running out.
Over half the cities in the U.S. will exhaust their current landfills by 1990.
In reality, the Mobro's seemingly aimless voyage dragged on because Lowell Harrison tried to cut transportation costs and take it to a destination that was closer. You see, the barge was already scheduled to be taken to Louisiana. Harrison was in need of some money, and a buddy of his had set up this deal where he would get a pretty decent little payday if he could get a massive load of garbage from Islip, New York to Louisiana for disposal. So he leased a tugboat and a barge and set off into the sunset to make his quick little fortune. Now, the town of Islip did have a landfill that was running out of space. That part is true. They were desperate enough to make the trash disappear that they would pay to have it taken away. So that's exactly what was on the table here, and Harrison was the man for the job. Now, once the barge was loaded, Harrison was really hoping to dock somewhere closer and unload the barge so that he could take home more money. Less distance to travel meant less operational costs. Mr. Harrison was able to make a deal with Morehead City, North Carolina. They said they would take the load of trash, but he arrived in port before the deal and the paperwork could be finalized. An environmental agent at the port spotted what he thought was a bedpan amidst the debris on the barge. He reported back that there was hospital waste on board and advised against the city of Morehead taking on this garbage. That little tidbit is what ultimately began to stir the media pot. With the deal with Morehead City now a no-go, Lowell Harrison departed North Carolina and set off to the coast of Louisiana, where the load was intended to go in the first place. In the amount of time it took him to get from North Carolina to Louisiana, the news network had blown this story up. and had everyone convinced that this barge was full of oozing bio waste that Harrison was just looking to have taken off his hands.
There could be infectious waste from hospitals. There could be hazardous waste.
We don't know what kind of tropical vermin is in that garbage. We don't know, it's been sitting in the sun for 6 weeks.
By the time he arrived in the Gulf of Mexico, the now infamous homeless trash barge was national news. And the state of Louisiana told him, yeah, never mind, we don't want it. They, nor anyone else at this point, wanted to deal with the potential public fallout that might come with taking on this load of rubbish. He was turned away and continued to be turned away from port after port after port after port. Now, during this time the barge was going from place to place, members of Greenpeace took a boat out to the barge, climbed up on the bales, and hung a huge banner that read, "Next time, try recycling." Boy, did that get people's attention. And of course, that was just more delicious little tidbits for the media to continue stirring into that pot. Finally, Harrison received a call that the city of Islip, New York would take the trash. Islip, New York. The same city that all of this trash came from. The same city desperate enough that they would pay to have it taken away.
We'll take it because we think for a one-time situation, we should do it and get it behind us.
Back up the East Coast, the barge went until it ported back in Islip, where it was met by more officials that wanted to check out the type of garbage they were dealing with, even though it came from them in the first place. Whatever. Upon inspection, they determined there may have been some trash from a medical facility, but absolutely none of it was biohazardous in any way. There is a lot of info to unpack in this full story, and I may end up doing a deeper dive into it for a future video, but for now I'm trying to give you like Cliff's Notes version. It should be noted here that there was never an issue with landfill space, nor were we ever running out of it despite what the news continued to report.
We've about run out of places to throw away our throwaways.
By 1990, according to one federal survey, at least 27 states will be critically short of space to dump garbage.
With new EPA regulations in place for landfills, there were a lot of landfills closing down. But these landfills were doing things like storing toxic sludge in bio-waste in barrels, in open fields next to pastures where beef cattle grazed, or next to water sources. So yeah, the EPA was shutting them down because, gross. What the media failed to say was that even though the number of landfills across the country had been reduced, the actual landfill capacity was expanding and growing. There was never any real threat of running out of landfill space at all. Now, prior to this time in 1987, residential and household recycling hadn't really taken hold, despite the fact that the EPA, along with other environmental agencies, had really been trying to get it to catch on. Now, after the Mobro incident and the Greenpeace banner being seen by millions of Americans, cities across the country began looking for ways to collect and deal with recyclable items at the residential level. Entrepreneurs saw this opportunity and jumped on it. They opened up recycling facilities and started charging cities to come and collect the items and recycle them. And most cities slid that cost down to their residents in the form of their city utility bills. And they still do today. Not many people back then even realized that plastic and styrofoam materials they were putting in their curbside bins couldn't even be recycled. But it didn't matter. At that time, the propaganda had already begun, and by the 90s, the message that we needed to recycle to save the planet was all over children's programming. So many PSAs popped up with catchy tunes, our favorite cartoon characters, and even entire shows that entertained us while we were indoctrinated. I won't say that all the PSAs had it wrong. In fact, I think that Captain Planet was amazing and was probably more truthful about it than most of the other PSAs we saw back then. Captain Planet made it a point to talk to us about the different types of materials, how to recycle them, and why we should. And the message was always more about reducing and reusing than it was recycling. Recycling was really like your last choice if you couldn't reduce or reuse. It seems like everything else had it the other way around. We were fed this message that if you just put your plastic, paper, and glass into the recycle bin, that it would magically be taken care of and you'd be doing your part to save the planet. For years, China was buying plastic waste from all over the globe to recycle it. Some of it they broke down into plastic chips that could be melted down and processed to make little cheap plastic items like toys and gadgets. Other types of plastic were incinerated and converted to energy because, pay no attention to all the toxins being spewed in the air. At some point within the last few years, I believe it was 2018, China changed their regulations and stopped accepting all this plastic garbage. With nowhere for this garbage to go, it began being dumped in random places throughout rural China and Indonesia. And you can't convince me that the majority of plastic trash in our oceans is not a direct result of being transported across seas. Things happen. Ships hit rough water, rogue waves, and storms, and sometimes a bale or two goes off the side. If it had been put in a landfill to begin with, the chances of it ever ending up in the ocean are significantly reduced. Not impossible, but reduced. These so-called recycling facilities in Asia started dumping unwanted bales of this waste on the sides of back roads in rural areas or in extremely impoverished villages. Now here's their loophole. When this trash gets dumped in these villages, the residents, mainly young children, spend their days scouring through the debris, looking for any bits of material that they can take back and sell to vendors for scrap. You know, recycling. These children are growing up in literal mountains of trash and swamps of dangerous sludge. All because we didn't want to feel guilty about putting it in a landfill. This has to stop. Plastic is not infinitely recyclable. Sure, you can put your milk jug in your curbside bin. It's plastic number 1, so it can even be recycled locally in whatever country you're in. But when it gets made into another item, more chemicals and compounds have been added to it, turning it into an entirely different type of plastic, which is not recyclable most of the time. There is no loop when it comes to plastic. It can be remade 1, maybe 2 times before it has to be disposed of by either burning it or sitting in a landfill. Recycling items like paper, lumber, glass, and metal is fantastic, and we should do it. We should all do it. Everyone should. And encourage your family and friends to do it as well. Recycling plastic is in no way sustainable. So what's the answer? What can we do? I don't have those answers, but I do know that the manufacturers, including those that are part of the organizations that seem to be aimed at protecting the environment, they don't seem to be too interested in finding other materials for their packaging. As an individual, I can make sure to properly recycle materials that can be effectively repurposed and remade. And I can properly dispose of waste products that are biodegradable, as well as properly disposing of waste products that are not biodegradable, so they don't end up in our oceans or in some poor village. As a consumer, I can only punish those manufacturers by no longer buying any of their products that come in single-use plastic. I don't want to give all my money anymore. And that is the ultimate goal for this channel, to work towards a way of life free from single-use plastics. I'm just hoping really to bring about some awareness. And if I'm really, really, really lucky, maybe I can inspire others to do the same. Now, here's your homework. I've put some links down in the description to a couple of really good documentaries that give way more details about these topics, as well as a paper written by Daniel K. Benjamin that breaks down the history of recycling and the myths that surround it. I highly, highly, highly encourage everyone to give it all a look. It will most definitely fill in the gaps that I have missed, trying to condense it all down for you in this video. That's all I got for you today. Until next time, I wish you all love, light, and a greener future.